everyone. My name is John Rotc. I'm a University of Wisconsin grad, and I am a townie. I was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was an eyewitness to actually 2 years of social activism at the University of Wisconsin and in Madison, my hometown. It's great to be here.
Hi, my name is Michael Thornton. I'm a recently retired professor in Afro-American Studies, Asian American Studies, and Sociology. I've been, during my stay at UW, I've been involved in a lot of student activism and community relations and working with students off campus. Thank you. Casey.
Hi all, my name is Casey Lucchini-Butcher and I'm the director of UW-Madison's Public History Project, and I'm here to provide some of the historical context to the history of campus activism, and our project is a multi-year effort to uncover and give voice to histories of racism and discrimination at UW, so this falls right in line with our project. So we're going to jump right in and start talking about some of the history and really start doing some of this table setting so that we can have a great conversation today about activism on campus. So I've been asked to talk about the history of activism at UW a few times in the past couple months, and when people think about protest at UW, they most commonly think of the 1960s, where protests on campus were commonplace. And there's a common misconception that that's when protests started at UW, but that's wrong. Students have been organizing, protesting, and voicing their concerns on issues for as long as the university has existed. And one of the earliest kinds of protests that we see at UW-Madison centers around one of UW's most foundational ideas, sifting and winnowing. So as a gift to the university, the class of 1910 gave the famous sifting and winnowing plaque as a class memorial. And the plaque has wording that is taken from a Board of Regents meeting in 1894. And it was wording that was supporting Professor Richard Ely, who was accused of being a socialist for his pro-union activities. The regents, thinking that students were influenced by radicals, rejected their class gift, and the class took their concerns to the local newspaper. So while students weren't picketing or marching in the streets, something we think of as protest, they immediately began organizing. They wrote letters to state representatives, got the support of other alumni, and wrote letters to other alumni, getting them involved, all of which worked to change the administration's minds. The regents ended up accepting the gift, and the plaque was installed in 1915 and sits on Bascom Hill. So I think that's a good foundation for us to understand that protest has really central to UW, and it's something that's been going on for a really long time. The reason that the 1960s get so much attention is because they were an era of unprecedented social action at UW-Madison. And there are two kinds of central protest issues that we see most often during this period, the anti-war movement and the burgeoning Black Power movement. So the most famous anti-war protests at UW are the Dow Protests. The first Dow Protest happened in 1966. Students were protesting the Dow Chemical Company representatives who were coming on campus to recruit UW students. So at the time, Dow was most widely known for making household cleaners, but they were also manufacturing and supplying the US government with napalm, which is a highly flammable gel gasoline that was used in Japan and Korea and is actually responsible for more deaths than nuclear weapons. So the most widely known protest, the Second Dow Protest, also known as the Second Dow Riot, was in 1967. And again, students were protesting the Dow Chemical Company recruiting on campus. So these are some photos from 1967. And things quickly turned violent when the National Guard was called in to assist the Madison Police Department. Students were violently arrested, beaten with clubs, tear gassed, and maced, as you can see in these photos. And after the protest, many students who had simply joined the protest to, quote, see what it was all about, said that the event radicalized them and that they went on to participate in dozens more protests at UW-Madison, but that they also went on to lead other lives of activism and as public figures, all because of this interaction. And the interaction also really hardened relationships between students and administration and between students and the Madison Police Department. And over the next couple of years, these relationships would only continue to harden as protests became commonplace on campus. And beyond the anti-war protests, there was also the burgeoning Black Power movement on campus. And this was happening across the country, and UW-Madison joined in as well. And I always like to point out that, you know, the way that 1969 is painted is that the students just got fed up and the Black students decided we're going to protest. That's not actually the case. Black students have been organizing since 1966 for change. And they had been trying to go through what we like to call the proper channels. And as you can see on the right, this is some of the ways that they went through the proper channels and got rejected, which is when they decided to strike. So after years of this kind of behavior on the behalf of administration, this is when students took protest action. It's also important to note that every single Black student at UW-Oshkosh was expelled for participating in a Black strike, and that was another movement that had really galvanized the Black students at UW to protest and to strike. So they went on strike in February of 1969, and they issued 13 demands to the university, including recruiting more Black students, creating a Afro-American and Race Relations Center, and creating a Black Studies department. Lasting weeks and engaging thousands of students, this was easily one of the most well-attended protests in UW's history. But beyond protests in the streets, which is what we often see photos of, Black students also held teach-ins to educate other students on Black history. They brought guest lecturers to campus to teach about the Black Power movement and held cultural nights to educate students on Black culture. So it really was this wide-ranging organizational movement on campus, far beyond protesting in the streets. And after weeks of protests, the university agreed to meet 3 demands, including recruiting and retaining more Black students, creating a Black Student Center, and creating the Black Studies Department. And while a majority of faculty members approved of the creation of the Black Studies Department, many did not. And I bring this up because it's really important to show that protests are never unanimous. And there's a way with time where people like to go and kind of sugarcoat the past and say, oh, everybody agreed and it was the right decision. The Black students who organized the strike in concert with other student groups often disagreed about the best protest tactics. And the same was true for those who opposed the Black student strike. While some of the faculty agreed that we needed Black studies and that they should be a stronger place in the university, many debated over what that place was. Should it be its own department or part of an existing department? And while some were confused about Black Power and its demands, many people who were opposed to the Black Power movement purposefully distorted the demands of students, as you can see in these quotes. And so they use these kind of purposeful distortions to work against the demands of students and to make them seem radical or, crazy, when really they were just asking for some pretty basic structural changes to the university. So the state government also grew increasingly concerned about protests at UW and started stepping in to make sure that protests were quelled before they even started. But it's important to note that the outcomes of the Black student strike didn't last. In fact, the only remaining remnant of the Black student strike is the Afro-American Studies Department, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. The demand to increase Black student enrollment was never met, and there are actually less Black students on campus today than there were in 1969. And as soon as all of the Black strike leaders graduated, the university actually closed down the Afro-American and Race Relations Center, which, of course, as you can see in this photo, students protested. So that's the kind of basic overview of the 1960s. And we'll come back with some more history of later periods, but I'm going to pass it over to Michael to talk a little bit about the structural responses and diversity planning at UW.
Thank you, Casey. I guess I should preview this by saying I'm not sure we've made structural responses yet. What I have listed here are kind of major touch points along the way. Despite Casey's recounting history of protests in the 60s, as you'll see, the first major plan to deal with diversity comes in 1988, the Madison plan. The impetus of that plan being the Holly Report. The Madison plan, for all practical purposes, was a formalized statement of how diversity was appreciated on this campus. And from my perspective, the major outcome of that was ethnic studies requirement on campus. So 1988 occurs, was supposedly moving in a new direction. Plan 2008 was the next major touchstone again. Diversity framework is published and its ongoing implementation of the REAL Act comes about in 2014. REAL is short for retain, equip, engage, and lead. 2020, Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement establishes an Office of Strategic Diversity Planning and Research. And you can read what that's supposed to be about. In some sense, rushing through this because I think there's a lot of opportunity for you to kind of further delve into detail about this stuff. But I kind of want to touch specifically on the last item I have here, There's 174 diversity initiatives on this campus. But if you ask many students of color and other people who've been disadvantaged in life and also on this campus, they don't really feel that there's 174 diversity initiatives. I would suggest that there's a lot of stuff going on campus in terms of diversity, but it's still pretty well disorganized. It's the isolated pockets on campus that do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people who have their hearts and minds in the right place, but in terms of structural factors, I don't think we have enough of those to really bring about the kind of diversity that we say we desire on paper. That would require a lot more people to be directly involved. That would require this campus to, for each one of us to live diversity every day and not merely pass on to other people. Perhaps pessimistic, I would suggest that on this campus we have a lot of people who value diversity only in kind of thought, but not in terms of action. So thank you. John? You're muted, John.
Thank you. Hi, John Roach here again. I feel my sense of purpose here, as I am not an academic, is to just bear witness to what I saw growing up in Madison. And I want to qualify it by saying that I'm actually very proud as a UW grad, as my father was, as my wife and children were, of Wisconsin's progressive reputation and traditions. I was born in 1953. It makes me 67 years old. So age is my greatest asset in kind of explaining what I witnessed. But my first sense of activism in Madison and the university came on the 4th of July in about 1965 when some University of Wisconsin, I perceive them to be professors or TAs, were dressed very nicely, but they were handing out anti-war literature at Westmoreland Park on the west side of Madison, near West Side. And when some of the men who were playing softball there, men on my father's softball team who were veterans of the Korean War and were alive during World War II, the notion that protesters were handing out literature saying that the United States was not the good guy was a shattering concept for them, and they reacted negatively and even violently towards the activists who were handing out this material. Then the next thing that I was a witness to, and I was kind of interestingly situated, my father was a State Street merchant. He had worked at a store called Badger Sporting Goods on the 500 block of State Street. Also, my uncle Patrick Roach was the Adjutant General of the Wisconsin National Guard and was in charge of the Guard troops that were called out. So as you can imagine, our family dinners and gatherings were very interesting. It was very common for my father to get a call at home late at night to say the windows of his store had been broken. He would run down there. The first things he was asked every time is, did Badger Sporting Goods have any weapons inside the store? Because the police were concerned about firearms being stolen from a sporting goods company. But as my dad would tell them time and time again, no, all we have are starter pistols for track meets. Then my dad would go down there and make sure it was secure. There was never any looting in my father's store. They broke the windows, but there was never looting to my knowledge, my memory. So they would go down there, secure the area, and then the local glass company, Klein Dicker, would put up plywood and then come a day or two later and put it in new glass. I never had the impression that my father's store suffered serious financial repercussions from the protests. Short of the price of some windows, that was really the biggest impact. And then whatever street traffic might be impeded on State Street because people didn't want to go down there. There were also people who were attracted to the protests. My Uncle Pat, being the Adjutant General of the Guard, he was right behind the frontline guardsmen through most of the anti-war riots. and when they were called out for the Black protests in '69. And I would have conversations with him both at that time and then later. And the one thing that I was most impressed with is that I asked my uncle, especially after Kent State, where 4 students were killed, and at Jackson State, where 2 students were killed, I asked him, did the Wisconsin National Guardsmen have ammunition in their weapons? And he said no. All the frontline guardsmen who were called out on Madison many times, none of them had ammunition in their weapons, which was really a wise choice in light of what transpired at other campuses. My uncle did tell me that they had sharpshooters positioned away from the protests, usually at an elevated thing, so if any fire broke out against the guardsmen, they would be able to respond. Thankfully, that never happened on campus. The Black student protest was interesting. My dad was a State Street merchant, and I remember vividly him coming home one day and saying that this really remarkable young Black kid had come into the store, about 15 years old, and captivated the whole audience. He was in town for a boxing match, which was big at the time. It turns out it was Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali. And I later had a chance to meet Muhammad Ali and told them in this story that he was in Madison for the Golden Gloves and went into my father's sporting goods store and really impressed my dad. And they gave him a whole bunch of free stuff. And he said, no, 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 it wasn't the Golden Gloves, it was the Pan Am Games. But it was just, the store was situated in such an interesting place that everything that happened seemed to walk by my father's store window. But the Black student protests, as I recall, were in February, which was cold. I remember as a townie, the protests happening more in the spring when everyone would, break free of the clutches of winter. And I was impressed by the fact that people were out marching in February, which is inclement in the state of Wisconsin. And my father was watching everyone go by. It was a large protest. And then he was surprised to see my sister and her friends from high school were in the march at the tail end, which was an interesting thing. I was also sleeping in bed on our near West Side home in August of 1970 when I was almost blown out of bed, literally, by the Sterling Hall bombing, which my father sat bolt upright in bed. My father leaned Republican and said to my mother, one of those SOBs blew up a building on campus, to which my mother told him to shut up and go back to bed. It turns out that my father was right. Just to cap it all off, to show how the 60s are still a part of Madison, I was playing golf at a public golf course 2 years ago, and a man hit a golf ball into our fairway, and I pointed out to him where his ball was, and he comes over, and it was Carlton Armstrong, one of the bombers of Sterling Hall. And I found it interesting because his golf ball had a big University of Wisconsin W on it. For someone who grew up in Madison, I am forever affected by the era of activism that I was a witness to. And I might add, for Father's Day this year, my oldest daughter, Kate, her Father's Day gift to me was to take us down, celebration was to go down and walk State Street and look the people were up and down State Street, including one at my father's place of business. So those are my observations, and I have to say I'm proud, once again, of the history of activism at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It affects, obviously, students, but also the greater Madison community as well. And the protests continued. I think that that's an important thing to note, well into today. So the 70s and 80s were really marked by a period shift to looking at international concerns and looking local, depending on what the issue was. And so many students were protesting international concerns largely focused on the United States government's foreign policy abroad. So here are Latinx student activists protesting on the left-hand side in the middle of the U.S. invasion of Nicaragua, and on the right-hand side, students created a cemetery on Bascom Hill to protest the loss of life
in the U.S. intervention in Panama. Black students at this time period were also protesting apartheid in Africa. And in the 80s, there were also many small local protests about issues at UW-Madison on campus. But the kind of climax of those protests is the Zbt Protest in 1988. So throughout the 1980s, fraternities on campus had been having racist-themed parties. And this had started in the 1950s when blackface and minstrel production fell out of fashion. And so instead of doing public minstrel shows, students took their minstrelsy and their blackface into private spaces, largely fraternity houses. And so there was a string of parties that got a lot of bad press, including Phi Gamma Delta's annual Fiji party, Fiji Islander party, where they would do blackface, and they would build a racist statue on the front lawn of the house. There was also, quote, Cherokee chug-a-lugs. And then the final kind of, straw that broke the camel's back on campus was Zeta Beta Tau hosted a slave auction party where fraternity members dressed up in blackface and were auctioned off for their labor. And once this got out, there was really extensive protest action on campus, particularly after the university refused to punish or sanction the fraternity, citing their right to free speech. Hundreds of students protested, calling on the university to take a stronger stance against racism. And you may note that Michael also pointed out that 1988 is the same year that UW puts out its real first diversity plan, any kind of structural plan to address diversity on campus. And so these protests actually came at the same time that this plan gets put out. So there's really a conversation on campus about what do we want an anti-racist campus to look like. And as you might guess, the concerns of students are not what is aligning with the administration at this point. But beyond anti-racism protests, students are protesting virtually every kind of social issue that you can think of. So reproductive rights protests are really important. So these photos are from the spring of 1989. I also like to show that if there's ever a protest, there was usually a counter-protest. So on the photo on the right, you can actually see a pro-life counter-protester in the middle of a pro-choice rally. And these reproductive rights protests happen all the time. Usually they mark whenever there's a challenge to Roe v. Wade or whenever there's kind of new reproductive rights legislation. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see more protests of this type in the coming year with the new Supreme Court nomination. And then there's also protests around discrimination policies on campus, and the most famous one is the ROTC protest in 1990. So a group of faculty, staff, and students moved to remove the ROTC from campus because of their ban on gay and lesbian individuals from joining. So they petitioned the university to kick the ROTC off campus, claiming that they not only defied university policy, but that they also defied state policy. And when the university refused, protests followed. And again, counter-protests, right? So on the left, you see students who are protesting the ROTC, and on the right, you have ROTC students who are protesting for the ROTC to stay on campus. You can't talk about climate change protests in Wisconsin without addressing the fact that we created Earth Day. And so every year there is a lot of action around climate protest on campus. And so this is actually the first ever Earth Day march in April of 1970. This is on the square right here where students are protesting. And these are UW students who marched from campus up to the Capitol. And as Wisconsin has a long history of union organizing, we can't talk about this without talking about union protests as well and labor protests. So on the left, you see photos. This is graffiti on the Humanities Building, so stop union busting. And on the right, you have the Memorial Union labor organizing strike in 1972. So these are workers at Memorial Union. But also the TAA continues this, right? There's constantly a conversation going on about workers' rights at UW, not only for students, but also for faculty, staff, and for how university employees relate to other state employees. Next up, Michael is back to talk to us a little bit about how students organize and kind of apply these politics in actual practice. Michael, you're muted.
Thank you, Casey. So as Casey's presentation is suggesting, that I think one of the takeaways on this campus is that student activism is key to any major changes that have occurred here, especially in terms of diversity issues. And so what I'd like to spend a little time talking about is how to think about being involved and being active. an activist, if you will. One of the first ways to do so is participate in some of the programming and take classes in the different departments on this campus that focus on issues such as African American concerns, American Indian, Chicana, Latino studies classes as well. Multicultural Student Center is an important part on campus in terms of meeting people who are involved in activists on this campus. UW Mortgage Center for Public Service is another key part to kind of find out what's happening not only on campus but also in the community. So there's something called the Wisconsin Idea Exchange that if you go to the Mortgage Center website can link you up to what other people are involved in, what members of the community, what agencies in the community need assistance from people like yourself. The second kind of thing is Wisconsin Idea Fellowships. These, again, come out of the Mortgage Center for Public Service, and they actually provide money for students who want to get involved in nonprofits and working with them and creating programming with them. The major fellowships out of the Wisconsin Idea Fellowship, I believe, offer about $7,000 a year for any activity that's involving some kind of agency, whether it's on campus or often internationally. Some students have worked in Africa in terms of helping provide clean water and finding clean water sources. So there's a number of other possibilities in that way. And before I forget, one of the things I was going to talk about, but given COVID, I'm not talking about that much, is the opportunity to take classes that are called community-based service learning courses that allow you to, as part of your courses, work in the community. And what my students will often attest to is that sometimes those are the most meaningful things that you can do in a classroom, because it involves taking what you're learning in the classroom and applying it to real life by working with a community agency. Also want to kind of give props to one of the funding sources my wife and I established at the Wisconsin at the Mortgage Center, the Michael Thornton and Normandino Social Innovation Award. So this is up to about $1,000 a year for students who want to be involved in affordable housing issues and or the academic resource gap, particularly in terms of how many of us know about how disadvantaged students don't do as well in schools in Madison. And so this money is made available to you to pay yourself if you want, to share with different organizations on campus to help bring about greater equity. So again, the takeaway here is that you have to get involved. As we know by now, that all of us have to get involved given how badly things have turned out in this country. And as most of us also realize that given through all this tragedy, it's becoming clearer and clearer that all of us are in deep trouble unless we all start to make a difference in this world. So thank you.
Yeah, and since I showed you a lot of photos in black and white, I would be remiss to not show you photos in color that also make this seem more real. Just because photos are black and white doesn't mean they happened so long ago. Many of these things continue to happen, and I think, as we all know, if we're involved in the community, there is a lot still happening on campus. One of the most famous scandals of this decade is the admissions brochure scandal in 2000. On the right is a photo of the admissions brochure for the year. So some of you, if you've heard of this before, you may notice that the black man pictured on the left doesn't really fit in the photo well, and it's because he was photoshopped onto the front. And after this happened, students immediately began organizing for change because, again, they felt that this highlighted what their experience was, which is that students are tokenized, students of color are tokenized when they're needed, and otherwise they're ignored. So I included this flyer on the left-hand side, which was a flyer that was handed out all around campus. So there were thousands of these that went out, and they're based on a Guerrilla Girls art piece, and it says, "We teach white bread, ingredients, white men, artificial flavorings, preservatives," and then it has a star, "contains less than the minimum daily requirement of other natural colors and flavors that compose the majority of the world." And the back of the flyer actually has current enrollment statistics for students of color, and the enrollment statistics from this flyer 20 years ago have not changed. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because I think it shows this real shift from, these kind of historic moments of student organizing to current moments. So these are some things from the archive that I brought out to show. These are the petitions that went around to students asking the university to make change. And something I think that's really important to note about all this organizing is that these students don't come to UW to organize, right? Theoretically, they come here to get an education in whatever they're majoring in. And so when students take up these efforts, they do this on their own time, outside of the bounds of assignments and papers, outside of jobs, outside of family obligations. And so this really is a lot of extra labor that we're putting on our students, not only emotional labor, but intellectual labor, physical labor. And these students walked around and got all these signatures. And this is 5 pages of hundreds of pages of signatures. So students were really out there talking to their classmates and making sure that they knew what was going on and getting their support. We also have notes from some of these student organizers who met to kind of think about how they were going to approach the provost. So these are really, really small notes, so I'm sorry about that. But on the left-hand side, it says October 24th, pre-provost meeting. And so this is a plan for how they're going to approach the provost to ask for what they want. And the reason that I pull this out is because people often tend to think, oh, students see something unjust and they get mad and immediately go to the administration. And what is really going on behind the scenes is a really active, rich organizing process where students are meeting with other students, they're meeting with people in power, and they're trying to figure out how to use these proper channels and how to negotiate the system. Again, outside of the bounds, theoretically, of what they come to this institution for, which is an education. And these protests continue outside of just university issues, as I'm sure we've all seen. Black Lives Matter protests have become commonplace at UW-Madison as students are kind of relating their UW struggle to also this, local, city, state, national, and international struggle for Black lives. And on campus, we've seen last year, I think a thing that really echoes in a very, we always say as historians that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if we're seeing a rhyme here, it is between the homecoming video and the admissions brochure scandal. So the homecoming video last year showed no students of color, even though students of color were filmed, and it created the Student Inclusion Coalition, which held various protests, was making demands of the administration. The image in the background is from the New York Times article that came out on New Year's Day that interviewed students about their struggle to organize against the university. And I've been asked to share this video, which is a 1-year update that the Student Inclusion Coalition posted yesterday. So I'm going to share this.
On October 24th, 2019, the newly formed Student Inclusion Coalition, otherwise known as SIC, issued 5 demands to change and advance equity and inclusion on campus.
Expect, we demand!
These demands were the result of a student-produced video promoting homecoming, which erased students of color. The homecoming video was yet another example of the negative experiences that students of color have on this campus. Since then, SIC has been working to bring change to UW-Madison.
Establishing a home where marginalized students can feel safe, valued and included, a place where we can be our most authentic selves, is SIC's ultimate goal. The history and contributions of Black and Brown students cannot be lost, taken for granted, or forgotten. Over the past year, the university acted on its commitment to work with the Student Inclusion Coalition to meet the demands and expectations of the student body. Together, we made the following developments.
To honor the anniversary of the 1969 protest for racial justice, the College of Letters and Sciences will honor the 4 activists who led the movement to establish the Department of Afro Am Studies. Awards commemorating their efforts will become a new UW tradition, as will a new scholarship for students.
To meet demand number 2, the administration allocated an additional $50,000 to the Multicultural Student Center, which will be used for grants to student organizations through the Multicultural Council, and to increase funding for Cultural and Heritage Month celebrations.
To honor Demand 3, UW-Madison and the Student Inclusion Coalition have collaborated to establish historical landmarks to honor the legacies and contributions of the National Pan-Hellenic Council.
For Demand 4, in collaboration with the Wisconsin Alumni Association and the Student Homecoming Committee, a delegation of diverse student communities provided consultation for Homecoming 2020. This will be implemented going forward.
For the final demand, Student Affairs created the new Office of Inclusion Education to prioritize diversity, inclusion, and social justice opportunities for all students at UW. The Inclusion Education Program, our Wisconsin, is now a requirement for all new undergraduate and transfer students.
There are still communities at UW that feel ignored and excluded. The Foundation for a Home has been established over the past year. It is important for UW administration to continue to listen and build on the work that has already been done. We are still here, and we are still sick.
So inevitably when I talk to students or community members about protests, particularly during this political moment, I am often asked about protest outcomes and what we can learn from different types of protest activity. And the subtext of this question is usually, is there a right way or a wrong way to protest? And in my research of protests at UW, it truly isn't really about student actions, and it's really about what the administration is willing to concede. So students can organize in ways that make their campaigns more effective, right? So for example, one thing that the university doesn't like historically and currently is bad press. And so when students use this tool, when they use the press as a tool, they can move the needle a little. But there's always this kind of invisible line that the university decides what it's willing to concede and what it's willing to not concede. And so there isn't a way that you can say your protest would be more successful if you did X or if you did Y, or, you know, you lost this protest fight because you didn't do this. And so it's important for me to always, when we talk about these incidences, to look at the historical record, but also to state, you know, that students don't have to ask for what they need in a way that is polite to the administration. They don't have to ask for human rights politely to be heard. And sometimes this conflict that comes out of that idea that somehow there's a right and a wrong way to ask for change on campus is really showing where the power lies, which is with the administration. And I wouldn't be a good historian if I didn't talk about James Baldwin. And so I want to show you the briefest James Baldwin video here. It's 22 seconds. Of course, now it is not going to, oh, here we go.
What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It has taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
And I think in the history of this kind of broad thing at UW, what you can see is that students, a lot of the demands they're making today fall into this really long fight for progress on campus. And so I want to make sure that when we talk about these issues, that we see them not only in their historical context, but also in the larger context of this fight that students are really participating in. And John's going to give us just some brief thoughts on kind of how students develop this social consciousness and about that important experience at that age and at UW.
Thanks, Casey. So kind of amplifying what you've just covered, I think that what Madison has been privileged to have in the middle of its city is a constant youth culture. And it seems to me that at least in modern America, most significant protests and themes of activism have come from younger people. Who are really seeing what they want the rest of their world to look like. And they see things with clarity sometimes that folks who are older do not see because they have a mortgage and a job and children, and they're sometimes distracted or their plate is too full to consider issues of social justice. And also they're not concentrated as students are. And it strikes me that students are kind of the vanguard of telling America where to turn their attention next. I remember in the latter years of the anti-war protests, which actually extended into the early 70s on the UW campus, and I was finally a student at the university and actually got gassed, just like all the people I had watched when I was growing up. But the latter day protests against the war weren't just students. It was moms with kids in strollers who are much harder to billy club and gas. It was whole families, and it was the length of State Street in candlelight marches. And it really started with a small group of anti-war activists far earlier in the 60s. And I think it's important to note, and again, I refer to the anti-war protests because it was formative for me, but it's important to note that we were right. It wasn't a good war. America was so used to thinking we were always the good guy in coming off of World War II. You could argue we were, but we weren't the good guys, and history has proven that out. And it took small groups of students on campuses across the country, Berkeley, Columbia, Madison, a little bit of Ann Arbor. We were where this protest action percolated and then became large. I would also say this. I remember being young during the anti-war thing, and it was exciting, but it was also incredibly sad because there was so much death. John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, the students at Kent State, and then in '69, 16,000 young men died in Vietnam. So we were in this culture of death. Our heroes were being killed, and guys we grew up with next door were being killed. And I think that the students rising up was almost primal. It was as if we had no choice. And I would argue that what we've seen in the last year has the same feel, that there is no choice but to rise up. And I think the youth culture is where that adrenaline comes from, and also a certain clarity of vision. I just was profoundly affected by youth culture on campus and in my hometown. And I think it still affects us in Madison today, at least from my point of view. What's next?
Next, we're in question and answers. So I'll end this slideshow and we'll move into, discussion.
Hey, Casey, are we all open now? Are we all talking?
Yeah, I think I'm waiting for the first question that we're going to be sent here in a sec.
I just wanted to speak to one issue you had when you were covering the protests at the university and how the administration reacted. I think it's important that students remember they're citizens first, and that their right to protest and voice their, their opposition to certain policies or anything. It's not as if you need the administration's permission to protest as a citizen. I think that's kind of an important thing. I know that the administration has all sorts of obligations, and that as a student you are beholden to the institution that you're a student at, but you are also a citizen, and with that comes certain rights that transcend being a student, I would argue. So do we have questions?
Yes. It looks like the first question is, how can people with activist goals make progress when COVID makes mass protests dangerous, especially for the medically vulnerable? I mean, I can start with that one. I can speak to what at least I've seen. I actually spent the majority of the pandemic in Minneapolis. So I had a front row seat to organizing and protest in the wake of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. So first of all, I think, the pandemic didn't stop people from taking to the streets, but that didn't mean that people went out there recklessly, not prioritizing the health of the community. I can only speak to my personal experience, but when I was at protests in Minneapolis, everybody was wearing masks. Masks were widely available and being handed out. People were taking care of one another with water, snacks. So I think that there are ways that you can protest safely in the streets. And I don't think that we should let the pandemic stop us from doing that in a way that is safe, particularly since, the data has shown that people haven't been getting sick at protests because they've been prioritizing community care. That being said, for many people who have pre-existing conditions, that's not an option. And so I think what this pandemic has shown us is that there are many ways to use our voice. So that's contributing to mutual aid efforts like bail funds, contributing to helping people who are experiencing homelessness find shelter, helping by writing to your state representatives, by writing to your city councilors, by putting the pressure on our elected officials to make change, by voting, by talking to neighbors and family members about why you believe Black Lives Matter. I don't think there's any action that is too small in this context, particularly if it keeps you safe, right? And so for lots of people, that's sharing something, that's talking to someone, that's writing a letter. Getting involved, I think, is kind of the first step.
What I would add to that is that I don't think we should only think about protesting, because protesting in some ways are highlight periods, right? But we need to focus also on day-to-day living of people who have been really hard hit by COVID. And so there's a lot of nonprofits in town that could use volunteers and stuff that you can do over the phone. You can call to see how other people are doing. And then, for example, my wife is working at Lucier, and she'll call people to see what they need, kind of material they need, soap, food, clothing, stuff like that. And she'll direct them to sources that can help them. So I think we too often think about kind of the highlights of protesting and activism in that sense, as opposed to the day-to-day activism that's as important, if not more important.
I would also just chime in and say that clearly social media is also another way to voice your positions. As someone who has some pre-existing conditions, being gassed or being involved in a protest might not be something that I could readily do, but certainly social media is a force now. And I think especially if you're, not perceived as being an activist, but then you stand up and say, hey, this should not stand. This is not who we are. And when those voices become a coalition and become more widespread, I think that can have an effect as well. And that is also an everyday occurrence, as opposed to a very specific gathering at a very specific time for a specific amount of time.
The next question is for you, John. Why do you think we haven't seen any significant campus demonstrations protesting the Bush wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? Is it because there was no draft, or there is no draft?
Yes. I think that doing away with the draft or some form of public service, which has been proposed, has had a huge effect on how we are willing to tolerate adventurous foreign wars. In the 60s, being drafted was a very real thing, and it became even more real for university students when they got rid of the student deferments, because actually being a student at a school like university protected you from being drafted, but that was a small window. And then all of a sudden, all the young males on campus could be drafted. I remember specifically being in a bar on the day they were pulling the ping pong balls. And all of us were in this tavern, and the taverns were full all over town, bars, because we were all waiting to see what our number was. It was the first big drawing. And there were guys there who were drinking because they had a low number, drinking because they're celebrating, and they were morose because they had a low number, they're going to be drafted, or they had a high number and they knew they weren't going to be drafted, so they were celebrating. And then there were guys in between who didn't know what was going on. And it brought it home. We were no longer insulated because we were in a university. And now with the volunteer army, it's a smaller group, it's a smaller population that we draw from, so it impacts fewer families. And I think that military families have almost become segregated from the rest of our population. And having a professional army also reduces the broader population of citizens from being impacted by our war. So I absolutely think it's an issue, and I absolutely think that is why there haven't been protests. I have to think if there was a draft during the Iraq War, there would have been protests on campus. There might have been some, but they would have been a lot bigger.
All right, the next question is how to get involved with hands-on real-time projects and grassroots steps to build the long-term change that many of us have committed to making. How do we do that? Michael, do you want to start with that one? That seems like your specialty.
It's a good question, difficult question to answer. I think it depends on where you are in this process, because I think one of the most dangerous things is to immediately jump into something you have no clue what it's about. So the first thing you really have to decide on, what's an issue that moves you? What can you be passionate about? What can you do that has meaning to you? And so, for example, in many of my courses, the students would come in with those kind of questions and then would work at their placement sites, usually nonprofits working with kids and teenagers, and they would begin to find what their passions are about. COVID really kind of limits the options in the sense that you can't visit very many places and work with them very much anymore. So do your homework, start investigating these issues, start reading up about them. There's a lot of stuff online you can read about. One of the keynote speakers for today talks about kind of white fragility. So if you're a person who's white and you don't know that much about your own race, read up about that stuff. So prepare yourself for when opportunities will be more plentiful. But too often people look to other people for answers to these questions, and you have to begin with yourself. What are you willing to get involved in? Some people need to read and then move on. Some people need to kind of do something proactively to learn something about themselves. So that's the first important question you have to answer for yourself, and you're the only one who can answer that.
Embrace this idea.
I would just chime in. I also think it's a lifelong pursuit for all sorts of reasons. I wasn't as active, but beginning in my 50s, I served on the Urban League board, became involved in Madison Prep, and I felt like I actually could have more impact being older and having perhaps more influence in the community and more time and resources to donate to a cause. In this instance, it was social racial justice and the Urban League and Madison Prep. I continue to be amazed, appalled that my hometown has such an awful racial achievement gap. It's in the very shadows of the university. It's appalling to me, and I decided to act on it. And I think that my willingness to act started when I was a student at the university. So it's not like you just protest when you're a student. That's when the seeds are planted, I would argue.
Yeah, and I would add that, as Michael was saying, you want to find an issue that matters to you. And then what I would add is find where that overlaps with the talent that you have or something that you feel that you're really good at and that you can contribute. And so, I'm a historian. And so when I see an issue, my first impulse is I can look at the history of that. I know where that history is. I know how to find it and I know how to do that work. So I'm going to make that history accessible to somebody else. Yours might be organizing. It might be bringing together a bunch of people for an event to talk about issues. You may be a really good facilitator. You may be somebody who's great with numbers, who's just really good with money. And guess what? A lot of these organizations need help with that. And so where those things overlapped, I think is where you can have the most impact. And the next question
Can I just say too,
yeah,
Casey? So I have a small video production company, and every year we adopt one or two not-for-profits, and we just do a video for them for fundraising purposes or whatever it might be. This past year was Simpson Street Free Press. We've done Respite Center. We've done Red Cross and all that sorts of things. I think that you can't ignore the firepower that organizations in the private sector can bring to some of these causes as well.
And the next question is, do we have any updates on current student demand, student protest, things that are happening on campus now? Michael, do you want to start or do you want me to start with that one?
So I'm not up on that.
Okay. So yeah, I think as we kind of talked about, students have always been demanding change on campus. It's been a pretty constant, but starting last year with the formation of the Student Inclusion Coalition, I think those demands have gotten a lot louder. And also, I think that they've really taken the forefront of a campus community conversation in a way that's really important. And so we saw the video, there's a couple updates there. And this year, there's also another organization that's formed, the UW-Madison BIPOC Coalition, who is making other demands as well. And my understanding is that those conversations are ongoing. You know, in my role as the public history project director, we have been trying to provide historical context for a lot of the demands and issues that are going on, talking to people about why the history matters for these demands, and where these kinds of contexts stem from and how we got to this place. But I think the important thing is that the conversations are ongoing. The next question is, what do you see as the most meaningful way for staff and faculty to support student activists? I would say supporting for a start. I think that there's, in my experience with the Student Inclusion Coalition and with the BIPOC Coalition, there's been a lot of silence from people who have a lot of institutional power at UW. Faculty members particularly can have a really outspoken say in the university, and they have a lot of power when they step up and support students. I think a lot of times people dismiss student concerns as frivolous, as, oh, they're just young, they don't understand the world, or they don't understand the administration or the complexities, and they don't take them seriously because of that. And I think that's a huge misstep. As we've seen at the History of UW, student demands really shake campus up, and they really make change for good. And so any support you can lend, whether that's like bringing it up at your department meetings, your unit meetings, writing a letter to the chancellor or to the dean, you know, flexing any kind of institutional power that you have is really important to back these students.
And what also, I used to do,
go ahead, Michael.
One of the things I used to do is offer credit for students to investigate the issues that were important to them, find out what the history of the UW was in terms of those kinds of things, have them develop a more kind of conceptual, theoretical understanding of the issues they're talking about. So even in that way, that's easy enough for professors to do that if they wanted to do that. So to ground them more in terms of understanding the historical context, but also the theoretical and conceptual way of understanding the issues that are important to them.
I was going to say that the faculty is a constant. Students are ephemeral. Students come and then they leave campus. And so that persistence and constancy of causes and organizing and making it a part of the fabric of the university and the community, it's hard to do if you're here for 4 years and gone. The faculty and staff are the constants. They don't go away. And in that way, they can be a tremendous asset.
But one of the ways that students can kind of elongate that process is for them to keep a record of what they've been doing. So when the next set of students come in, they don't have to start from scratch. They know who the networks are. They know the people who've been helpful to them, et cetera, et cetera.
The next question is, what action steps would you recommend in translating student activism to changing institutional culture and policy?
That's the $100 million question.
Yeah, I'm like, I wish we could solve that today for you all. Again, I mean, for me and really looking at the historical context, but also being involved in some of the current conversations, it really is about what power the institution wants to cede and what the administration wants to give up. Yes, there are ways you can organize smart. Yes, there are ways that you can host better protests, right, or bigger turnouts, but that's not what's going to move the needle. The thing is, it really is about what the administration is willing to concede, and how far the institution is willing to change itself.
Also, there's a I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, John.
Well, there's a political context to it too. The university gets pressure from the state government, which for the last, up until Tony Evers for 8 years was Republican controlled. And it's not uncommon for legislators to use activities on campus against it during budget time. So it's a delicate dance that administrators are performing because I know for a fact in the 60s, for a long time, those protests were held against the Madison campus by outside of Madison legislators and all. So there's a lot of constituencies that the administration has to manage in order to get the funding and resources that they need. And that is a reality in the state of Wisconsin, as we've seen with funding cuts and all sorts of things. It's not, unusual for protests to draw the attention of legislators.
But I think not to make this too simplistic, I'd like to go back to something Casey offered earlier on. Embarrass the university. Bring bad press to the university. That if you look at all the major changes that happen on this campus, it usually follows those kinds of things, right? It's not people sitting around a table and offering rational arguments, because as you're suggesting, John, there's a number of agendas that are important, and some agenda is going to get automatic attention. Others, you need to make noise. And there's 40,000.
And it's not just UW. It's not just UW-Madison. Higher education, every institution in the country hates bad press.
Exactly.
That's the key. They love that idyllic campus.
Yeah.
High-minded, justifiably, but it's, if you don't live up to your values and you're held accountable for it, that's mortifying to them.
That's right.
Yes. The next question is, how is Black Lives Matter different or the same as past protests? I can start with or do you want to go, John?
Well, we've talked about this around our dinner table with my adult children, who are all Badgers. And I proffered to them that because the George Floyd murder occurred kind of during COVID, there were no distractions. I think it was a much bigger and much more prolonged protest because America was forced to look at it for a prolonged time. There were no sports to distract us. Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses. I think sports are the opiate of the masses in America. And I like sports, but we're an easily distracted people. And there was nothing to distract us from that. And also, I think that the camera phone has revolutionized things. That it is giving digital witness to what has been said, but huge portions of our population, mostly white, haven't seen firsthand. And so all of a sudden, white America is appalled at what they're seeing, even though Black America has been saying this has been going on for a long time. I think this protest stands out in terms of having gravitas and having legs, being prolonged. And I also think it's got a very broad base.
I would agree. I think if you look at the founders, that says a whole lot about the potential of the movement. And I think ultimately this is not a protest, it's a movement. It's going to be around for a long time.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's been, I'm sorry, go ahead, Casey.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think historically, if we're looking at protests and how they work, one of the interesting things about Black Lives Matter protests or any protest against police brutality is that you are in the streets and you are standing directly opposite of who you are protesting. And that's not often always the case. So for example, when you see the 1969 Black student strikes, you have students walking down State Street and they're protesting the university generally, but it's not individual against individual. And the way that police brutality protests are set up is inherently oppositional. And I think that is why you see bad behavior on the side of the police, because what you see is they are literally standing there seeing themselves be attacked. And so it sets up an oppositional attitude from the start in a way that, like, when you protest climate change, like, yes, you may be protesting legislature, or those legislature people might be in the building, but it is not in the street, face to face. We are confronting one another. And I think that has set up this stage where you get people specifically the police having an aggressive response to protests. That's my personal opinion, but it's different from other protests in the oppositionality of the setup from the jump.
I also think that professional athletes have played a role in this that we haven't seen before. These are incredibly wealthy men, incredibly visible men in multiple sports across the full calendar of the year. And whether it be LeBron or Colin Kaepernick, they have finally leveraged the power that they have in our culture and in their specific sports. And I know that sports is a lightning rod when it comes to race, but I think it's been fascinating to see Black professional athletes and college athletes now leverage the power that they have to make the voice of BLM be much louder. And they're carrying it on day to day. It's not just a march for 3 days on State Street. It's on jerseys. It's in negotiations, the players' unions negotiations with the league. And I think that's kind of a big deal.
But I hasten to add that we shouldn't give them too much credit, that they're more supporting actors in this process than actually the activists themselves, because they're going along for the ride in some sense.
Fair enough.
And I want to dedicate some time to, we only have, less than 10 minutes now, 9 minutes. And so the question is, do you have recommendations on how to talk to people, relatives, friends, etc., who don't understand the need for social justice protests or who argue that the protests are, quote, all destructive?
Begin slow. One of the worst things that you can do is be like one of those born-again people who now believe they have all the answers and they want to ram it down your throat. That never works. Consider whether or not the person you want to change is worth investing in. If it's a relative, someone you care about, then you know you have time. So you drop stuff along the way. You don't argue with them. Find things that are meaningful to you in terms of reading material. Give it to them. Have conversations periodically about stuff. Ask them questions that they might have about stuff. So as something John mentioned earlier on, this is a journey, right? This is not something that's going to happen overnight, especially if they come with a whole set of baggage that most people do, especially in terms of protest. Even having to clarify that protests are 99% of the time not violent or destructive, right? They're merely people going out in the street and expressing their opinion about something that's important to them. The fact that the 1% of the time that it happens violently is made to kind of generalize to 99% says a lot about our understanding about other people. So finally, also continue to educate yourself. None of us will ever arrive about these issues. There's always something else we can learn and must learn to make ourselves better people, but also especially when we're trying to educate others about stuff like this.
No true words, Michael. I would just say that facts are important, and especially facts if you lay them out to show how certain causes actually are beneficial to everyone. There's benefit to every American to figure out the racial achievement gap in America. It has benefits that cross all sorts of issues for our nation. And if you start laying it out for people and just deal with facts, it's helpful, facts and process as opposed to emotion. That sometimes is helpful.
I think facts are important, but I think they're secondary because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is very emotional for most people. The fact that people are angry as hell about Black protesting says something much more emotional than it does about factual stuff. And part of the era that we're in now is that facts, in some sense, are secondary to how most people feel about stuff. Why is it that, on average, most white people now figure that they're the key victims of racial discrimination? You can show them facts all the time, but that's not going to change their mind. There's something emotional involved in it, psychological involved in it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what Michael said to begin with, that you have to meet people where they are. So like you can't go to somebody right away if they're like at the 101 stage and take them to like the advanced grad level course, right? Like you have to start where they are and then slowly make change through that avenue, because otherwise they're going to shut down right away. And so that's figuring out where that person is in this process and talking to them about that. I also think that there are ways that you can frame this for people. So for example, you know, some of the commentary has been that these are very destructive. Well, to build something new, we have to destroy something. Sometimes destruction can be very generative. And if our systems haven't been serving us, then why should we just keep them standing just because we always have kept them standing? I would also say that this is an emotional issue, right? So this isn't like, oh, only Black men have been being murdered by police in the past 5 years. This has been going on literally since this country was founded, when enslaved people were brought here against their will and then killed, and then it continued through lynching, and now what you see is a very modern form of that, where the police are killing Black men without consequence. That has an emotional weight to it. And so when you see people in the streets and you see them breaking windows, when you see them yelling, when you see them starting fires, as Martin Luther King said, a riot is the voice of the unheard. This is something that people have been talking about for decades, for hundreds of years, and it's gone unaddressed. So this pot that's been boiling, it's not surprising that it's boiling over. And I think that there are many ways that we can think about civil disobedience and property destruction. And at least in the history of UW-Madison, that has been a constant. And instead, I think what we need to do, instead of kind of having these sensationalized news clips where, oh, the whole world is ending because a window is broken, we need to have a serious conversation about the emotional weight of this history, and also about the history of protest and nonviolence put into this entire context. Otherwise, these conversations are devoid of these meanings that are crucial to understanding why this is happening right now.
Also, in the midst of the emotion, it's okay to check the hyperbole. When they say our cities are burning, it's 2 or 3 buildings. Hyperbole becomes a fire of its own after a point. And to be able to counter it with saying, well, that's actually not true, or Portland is actually about 4 square blocks, or State Street, you know. I've had to tell people State Street isn't closed because of the BLM protest. It's closed because of COVID. More than the BLM protests, I would argue. But there's the hyperbole takes over conversation so quickly. And if you can just say, well, hold on, just to be clear, this, and this is actually true. I don't know if that helps.
I think the final part I'd like to leave the audience with is that one of the key things to get a better understanding about is the difference between prejudice and structures, right? Because we could change all our minds tomorrow, but the sexism is still going to exist, racism is still going to exist because it's built into a system. That's the hardest for people. That's the hardest thing for people to really understand. Because in this country, everything's about individualism and personal responsibility, and if we change ourselves, everything's going to be fine. It doesn't work that way.
I agree. That's a really important point, Michael.
The note I have is that as a white guy of a certain age is to listen more.
And to act on what you've learned. Without that action, it doesn't make any difference.
All right. Well, that was all of our questions. There's like a minute left. Thank you all so much for coming. If you have any questions about any of the history about UW or anything, please feel free to reach out. Most of this history was done and compiled by UW Archives, which is part of the libraries, and then also by the UW-Madison Public History Project. If you want to follow up with the Public History Project, we have a website, publichistoryproject.wisc.edu. We have a blog where we publish new blog posts. We just put out a blog post about the history of blackface and minstrelsy on campus that is really great. So I would ask you all to check that out. And then feel free to follow up with any of us as presenters here. I'm sure we'd all be happy to talk to you.
And I welcome you to also check out the Mortgage Center for Public Service website. They have a lot of material about this kind of stuff, and they also offer financial resources for it as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting
Thank you,
us to
Michael.
the
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah,
thank you all.